Hello fellow Unreal Engine developers. In this last of the Tropical Island series, we're going to carry out a series of refinements. We're going to end up with better clouds, better water, better rocks, better foliage, plus we'll add some imperfections to our meshes and textures to really create interest and variety for our final viewer. So let's get straight into it. You may have noticed that our volumetric cloud is kind of flat looking, and if I select the volumetric cloud in the outliner, you'll see that the material here is this simple volumetric cloud instance, and we can do better than this. There's a plugin with volumetrics which has a whole load more materials, so let's enable that and see if we can get our clouds looking a bit better. So go into your edit plugins and search for volumetrics. Select it. You'll have to restart. So click on restart now. And once your system is restarted, let's zoom out to see the clouds. And let's see if we can change the material. So if I go into my content drawer here, if I go into the engine plugins and go down to V for volumetrics and content, sky, materials, you can see that there's all of these volumetric materials in here. So if I select this volumetric cloud O2 profiles paint clouds, some of these don't work very well, by the way, if at all, but this one here is a good starting point. So volumetric cloud O2 profiles paint clouds, select that, just dock your browser for now, so, and reselect that if it's not unselected. Then go to your volumetric cloud and go down to the material and click on this use selected asset from browser, and immediately you get much more three-dimensional looking clouds. So let's close the content browser now so that we have a bit more space, and we can do our standard amendments here. So you can see in the volumetric cloud you've got these two parameters for the layer height and the layer bottom altitude. If we make the layer height thinner, you can see we flatten the clouds, and this is having much more an effect on the perceived height. And we can also lower the clouds or raise the clouds up in the air. So those are two sort of broad parameters. But these materials have a whole host of other parameters we can change as well. So if I go into the window again here, what I can do is, I don't want to change this material because I don't want to affect the plugin for other projects. But if I right click and create material instance, and let's call this one Island at the end. So it's M volumetric cloud 2 profiles paint clouds island. Click on that, dock the, let's select it again, this one here, island, and now go down to my material and use the asset from the content browser. So there'll be no change at the moment, but if I hover over it, you can see it's using my paint clouds island. Now if I go into this material here, you'll see I have a whole raft of parameters with very obscure names. So you've got all sorts of, things like density and detail are meaningful, but then you've got things like phase, phasey. These are all good to play around with, but I'll show you a couple of changes that have a notable effect. So let's just again position ourselves so we can see quite a few of these clouds. And the first thing I want to have a look at is density. So if I select these two here, density and depth density, you'll see here that the density I can reduce. So if I go down to 1, you can see how the clouds are getting fewer in the sky, or there are less clouds in the sky. So if you want to have fewer clouds, then reduce the density amount here. The depth density here is really to do with how opaque or transparent the clouds are. So you can play around with that as well. And then we can also look at detail. Let's up the density again a bit, so 0.5. So we've got a few more clouds in the sky. So if I look at the detail, let's click on these three: detail, detail MIP, and detail 2. If I increase the detail, you'll get a little bit more information around the outside the clouds, and the detail MIP is all to do with increasing the detail as well. So if I want less detail, if I raise this, you can see when I get to 8, it's almost a sort of billowy clouds, but if I reduce it to 2 or 1, it creates more detail in those clouds, sort of more noise in the clouds. And this detail 2 here as well, if I up this, can you see it creates a lot more variation. In fact, you can probably go overboard with this. If I go to 2, you can see I've got almost tiny little clouds in here, but probably too much here at the moment. So let's reduce it back down to 0.6. And then maybe reduce the density to 0.2. Or even 0.1. There we go. So you've got a lot of controls here. So I encourage you to play around with these parameters and see what effect it has on your cloud formations. But you can see that this is a much more convincing three-dimensional cloud than the original simple volumetrics material. So let's now move on to looking at water. I've got quite a few things to talk about with regards to water, but let's start off by looking at the general color of the water, and then we'll look at the sort of wave look and feel, and finally have a quick look at setting up a bit of foam. Although I have to say that the foam in the free water plugin is not fantastic, although you can get away with a little bit of foam in the close-up views, the player views. So let's start off with color. At the moment, we've got this very light tropical water at the moment, which is nice, but I don't want it to be light all the way out into the ocean. I want it to be light on the shoreline, and then I want it to get darker to give the feeling that the volcanic island shelves down into deep water nice and quickly. So let's pick our water body ocean and go down. So in the details panel, scroll down until you find the water material, and then browse to it. It's this water material ocean. I don't want to change this one because this is in the plugin and it'll affect future projects. So let's duplicate it, select it, do Control D, and let's call it water material island, and do Control Shift S to save it. Then go back to our water body, and in the materials here, select the water material island. And there shouldn't be any change at the moment because it was a duplicate. But now let's look at the parameters we can change in here. So browse to it, open it up, just move it over to the right hand side of the screen, and you'll see there are a wealth of parameters you can change here. So we'll look at some of these in more detail in a moment, but for now, just to do with color, if you drill down to this global vector parameter values, you've got this absorption parameter parameter, and if you open that up, you'll see at the moment the absorption alpha is 8, and if I reduce that alpha, you can see that as I reduce it, the color goes down until you get sort of a very dark color here. So it's up to you what you want. So I started off at 8 here. If I reduce it to 2, that looks pretty nice to me. It's dark but not too dark. But you'll notice an issue here. If I come up here, you'll notice that especially if I click off here, where this water ends and the far water begins, there's a change in color. So we need to change the far material to have the same value as well. So let's click save on here, and we will actually, let's leave that there. Let's dock this on the right hand side because we'll be using this in the future. So I'm going to put that on the right, move it along. Okay, now let's go back to the main scene, and this time pick instead of our water body ocean, we want to pick the water zone, and the water zone is responsible for the material outside of the main ocean. So again, if you go down in the details section until you find the mesh section, and then you want to expand this far distance area, and here you have a material. So let's browse to that, and we have this water far mesh material. So again, we don't want to change that. Let's duplicate it. Let's call it far mesh island. Do a quick save. And now in our far distance material, let's select water far mesh island. And we now need to go in and open that up. And then in here, we need to find the same section. Let's do the color. There's the absorption. And reduce our alpha to the same amount. So now you can see that the far mesh matches the color in the horizon. So we've got that working. Now let's close down the far mesh because we won't need to do anything more with the far side of it. It was only the color we need to change. So now let's go into a bit more detail on the just sort of wave look and feel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill down into the beach. We'll zoom into the beach and just get here. So let's go back to our water body ocean, and first of all let's just have a look at the general look of the sort of waves near to the player. So if we go into our water body ocean detail, let's go back up to the top and find the water waves asset we were using here. So drill into that and open it up. If you remember, this is where we set up the general number of waves, wavelengths, amplitude, and that sort of information. So one thing you might have in here is you might have if I put this back to its defaults, you might have this for the wind, so that it's basically swirling round quite a few different angles. But I think it probably looks a bit better. We want to look for a calm motion. It probably looks better if we reduce the angular sweep to just a 90 degree. And what that'll mean is it just gently meanders within a 90 degree ratio. So that just makes it look a bit calmer. And I'd also quite like the waves closer to the player to look a bit calmer as well. So we can change the max wavelength here to, let's say, make the minimum 500 and the maximum 1000. Actually, that's made it more. Yeah, so actually you want that to be higher. So if I wanted to be calmer, so maybe make the minimum. Yeah. So that's created a sort of a calmer look there. Again, it's really down to your own Yeah, you definitely don't want that sort of thing there. You want it to be a higher number there. So you can play around with these to get the look you're after. What we can also do is these waves near to us aren't controlled by this, they're controlled by the material. They're controlled by the normal parameters in the material. So let's close this one down now. Save it, close this one down, and you should still have your water material island open. If you go to the top, we've got these detail normal settings here. So you've got distant normal settings and near normal settings. So let's just select these 5 here. Let's move it over so we can see a bit more what the parameters are called. So let's start off with the near normal strength. So at the moment you can see the near water scale is 512. If we double that to say 1000, and you'll notice it doubles or doubles the scale of the waves closer to the player. So you can see 500, 1000, 2000. So if you want to have a calmer look in the near ground, rather than 500 that it was, you could go for something like 1000. And the normal strength will dictate how these waves, how much these waves show. So if you have it at 0, it doesn't show at all. If you have it at 1, you have a sort of a very intense effect. So actually that 0.25 was probably about right, maybe even slightly lower than that if we want a calmer effect. And then these settings here for the distant normal strength do the same in this sort of area here. So we can do things like, if we let's increase the normal strength again, let's do it to 1 and 1. There's sort of this one here is a blend between the 2 normal strengths and the distance. So I put them up to 1 just so we can see what's happening. If I make the scale say 5000, oops, you can see if I do 1000, it makes them tightly packed together. 5000 further apart, but the normal strength is way too high. So if I reduce the normal strength to 0.1, you can see that it's a lot calmer looking in the sea. So now I have a more gentle looking ocean for my player. Okay, so let's now have a look at creating a bit of foam on the water, although as I said, it's not the best of water plugins. You probably have to get a paid water plugin to do decent foam, but let's give it a go anyway. So if you go down to the global switches here, you'll see that enable ocean foam is checked on by default, so you might be a bit confused, why isn't there any foam there? So first of all, make sure that enable ocean foam is selected, and then the reason you're not seeing any foam is because of this height bias. The height bias here dictates whether foam appears, any foam appears. So if you move this up to 0 or 1, let's do 1 here, you get this horrible foam, and one of the problems with the foam system here is the repetition of the foam. You can change the scale of it, but you've got a problem because you want different scales depending on whether you're looking at it close up or further away. But let's try and make the foam for the player view. So let's go into play mode here. Let's sort of go up to the shoreline, and what we'll do is we'll just come out of play mode. Right, so let's try and set up foam that looks good from this angle. So start off with the height bias in order to create the height you want. So 0, there's nothing. 1, there's too much. Let's put 0.5 in the middle, and can you see that actually doesn't look too bad like that? So what are the other parameters that affect the foam and how it works? Well, Probably the next thing I would look at is the foam scatter bias. So this works together with the height bias in order to say how much foam you've got. So if I do 0 here, it's really to do with the sort of extra foam you've got around the main foam. So let's leave that at the moment, because we'll do some other settings here. The foam scattering MIP here, can you see that as I bring this value down, let's put it up, it's basically creating more detail as I lower the value here. So if I go for something like 4, then you've got foam with some of this scattering around it, sort of like that. So let's I don't really want to see anything other than the foam here, so let's change that bias down, and we'll adjust that again in a second. Let's look now at movement of the foam. So if I go and find a setting called foam attachment, so let's see if I can find it here. Otherwise, there it is, foam attachment here. If I set this to 0, what you'll notice is that the foam is completely stationary, which is wholly unrealistic, because foam moves around with the waves. So if I change this foam attachment to 1, you can see that now the foam is moving roughly 1-to-1 with the waves. And if I make it 2, it's moving around twice as fast as the waves, which is again kind of unrealistic. So normally you'd go for something like 1 here to get the foam moving at the same rate as the waves. If you want a sort of calmer look here, I might go for 0.5, just to have the foam looking a little less motion on it. And again, let's go into play mode and have a look. Yeah, maybe I can afford to go up to 1. So let's make the foam attachment 1. Okay, and I don't really want that little smearing effect here. So what we can do is let's have a look at the foam contrasts and the foam opacity. So foam opacity, if I do 0, I get nothing but just that smeared side. So leave that as 1, that's fine. Foam contrast, if I make that 0, you can see that it's created more of the white foam here. If I make it 1 or 2, so that's creating more contrast between the white and the smeary portion. But I don't really want this smeary side, so let's adjust the height bias. Let's make that 0.5, and then let's adjust the foam scatter bias. So 0, we haven't quite got there. You can actually go to minus values here. There, minus 0.5. So it's kind of a combination of this height bias and foam scatter bias. So now I've got the foam, but I've managed to, with the foam scatter bias, get rid of that smeared section around there. And that's probably fine in terms of the close-up view. As I said, it's not great. It's not great foam, but you can play around with it and get something that will work for the close-up view. Personally, I'll probably be switching it off in my version just because I'm just not that keen on it. One final area to show you on the foam is that you can change the scale of it. So at the moment there is a bit of repetition here, which again is fine close up, but if you look at the, let's see if I can find the foam macro scale here, you can see that this value here affects the tiling. So at the moment it's about 1500. If I double it, you can see, and double it again, you can see that it makes the scale larger here. The problem is that even from even at large scales, at distant views, let's go up and out, it just doesn't look right. So by all means play around with the foam for the close-up view, but don't expect great results from it. And personally, I will probably end up disabling that here, so that we just have the standard water. So definitely worth changing, I think, the color and the wave normals to create this darker and calmer looking ocean, but probably wouldn't bother with the foam in the free water plugin. So let's carry on by looking at improving our rocks. When I did the RVT blending for the rocks, you can see I got a bit heavy-handed with the parameters, and you can see this sort of harsh line in the middle of this rock. And so I want to just change that so it sort of smooths out the blending between the texture of the sand and the rocks. So if you open up your content browser, go to the Content Megascans 3D Assets, and it was the Thai Beach Rocks pack. Let's just open up the material instance for this. Move it over here slightly so we can see the scene. And if we go down to the RVT section, it was this blend contrast that was the offending factor. So I shouldn't have really increased it much over 1. So if I reduce the blend contrast to 1, you can see that it now blends the sand from the bottom up to that sort of layer. And then the blend smoothness affects how high it goes up. So 0 is down at the bottom, 200 it goes sort of further up here, but actually 100 was not far off. It's up to you. Again, it's down to taste. You can see that this works well, 100 on this rock. The back rock here, because it's darker, maybe 200 works better. So yeah, maybe I will stay with 200. Now the rocks look as though they're more the color of the sand underneath. So again, you can play around with the other parameters as well. The sharpness here, if we make the sharpness sort of slightly less, it was at 1, then it again reduces it. Actually 1 seems all right, and the normal contrast, yeah, probably about the right area. So really the main thing I got wrong here was the blend contrast. So I've reduced that from 5 to 1, and then the blend smoothness is either 100 or 200, and we end up with these rocks that blend a bit more into the textures without a harsh line. So let's move on to foliage. If you remember, when I created the foliage tutorial, I said it would be nice to have some coconut trees or palm trees here, but I couldn't find any good free assets on the marketplace. Well, while I was browsing around YouTube, I found this video tutorial that was uploaded a couple of months ago by this guy here, BFX Factory, and it was a sort of a smaller island similar to the one I've done here. So he had rocks and boardwalks, but I did notice he had these coconut trees, so my interest was piqued and I wanted to know where he got the coconut trees from. Well, he's actually provided the link in the description here where to get them from, so you can download the coconut tree from Google Drive. So if you I'll put the link to this video in my description. If you go there, watch the video, see if you learn something from it, and then go and download the coconut tree. So it's in a zip file, download it, unzip it, and then what you'll notice is that you have these 3 FBX files, because he's done 3 different variations of the coconut tree. So what I suggest you do is in your 3D assets, let's just create a new folder called coconut trees. Go in there, and then I'm going to go to my folder with the 3 FBX files in, drag them in to the coconut trees, and you can leave all of the default settings here. Just do import all. And after a few seconds of importing, you should have 3 coconut trees in that folder. Don't worry about this, just clear that message, come out, and you can see here you've got the upright tree, which is number 3. You've got the half sort of bendy tree, untitled 1, and then a full bendy tree here. So I'm just going to use the half bendy tree. So let's rename that first. So rename, and I'll call it coconut tree. I'm not going to worry about the other ones there, but if you want other trees in, you can use those as well. The one caveat with this is it's quite a detailed polygon, so you can see the triangles there, 168,300, and there are no levels of detail. So we'll fix that in a moment, but again, if you put lots of trees on there without levels of detail, then your performance will drastically decrease. So let's have a quick look just what it looks like. If I drag it into the scene and put it on here, you can see it's pretty good. You know, if we go around to where the light hits it, the foliage is nice, catches the light. The tree bark looks good there as well. So I think these will fit nicely in, and you probably don't need to do any changes to the materials or the colors. So we want to put that into our grass type layer, so it scatters them around in the same area that we've got our current trees and grass. So let's open that up. Actually, first thing we need to do is we need to make a foliage type for our coconut tree, and the quickest way to do that is just go into foliage mode here, take this tree that you've created, just drag it up here until it goes orange, and then if you go down to where the tree is, or up to where the tree is here, if you just click on the save foliage asset, it will probably default to the same folder here, 3D assets coconut trees, and that's where you want to save it. So now we have a foliage type we can use. So you can go back to the regular mode. Let's do a quick save as well while we're here. All right, so let's open up our landscape grass type to add this tree in. So go to the open land directory grass, and this was we used Smart Mask 2 for our landscape grass type. So open that up. Let's just move it along a bit. And what we'll do is so we've got a couple of grasses and this pandanus tree at the moment. What I'll do is I'll duplicate this index 2, the big plant. So duplicate that, then open up index 3. Now I'm going to make the grass density much less, because as I said, these are quite detailed polygons, so we don't want to overwhelm the graphics card. So let's make the grass density 0.3, and let's now change this mesh to coconut tree. So select the coconut tree here, and you can see that it's way too big, so let's change the scale from a minimum of 0.3 to a maximum of 1. And maybe it can be a bit bigger than that actually. Let's make the maximum 2. I mean, we're really only going to know if we put the player in and see it in relation to the player. Yeah, maybe it's slightly too big, so let's reduce the max to 1.5. Okay, and that looks pretty good. In terms of performance, my performance is still pretty good there, but I just want to show you how, because it depends. I'm on a 3080, so I can probably cope with a little bit more foliage than some of the lower end graphics cards. But let's see if we can improve performance a bit. So it's at about 85, 86 frames per second at the moment. So first of all, let's visualize what's going on with the levels of detail here at the moment. So actually, let's increase the density here to 0.5. So we have a few more, a few more on the side there. Again, check the performance. Yeah, still at 85, that's fine. So if we visualize the levels of detail, so go into your lit menu here, and you've got level of detail coloration, mesh LOD coloration, and you can see that all of the palm trees at the moment are white. White is the highest level of detail. So as I go into the foliage, you can see that the other ones are popping in with different colors. So the pandanus tree is green now it's red, and as I get closer to that pandanus tree, that finally turns white as well. So, and same if I go here, yeah, that's now starting to get white on the grass. But the palm tree is continually white because we don't have any lower levels of detail for here. But we can fix that in Unreal Engine by going into the mesh and automatically setting up automatic LODs. So let's come out of the LOD coloration mode for a second, and let's go to our coconut tree mesh. So browse to the coconut tree, open it up, and let's put it in a bigger window so we can see what's going on. So what you can see here is that as I go in further away, closer, the LOD stays at LOD 0 with triangles 168, 300. So what we can do is we can set up some automatic LODs for this, and we can see how it affects the quality. So in our LOD group here, we can change the LOD group to small prop, and it will say it'll overwrite the current settings. We'll say yes, and after a few seconds of recalculating the meshes, so that took about 30 seconds for to calculate that. I just paused the video while it happened, and can you see now that I'm on LOD2 here, so that as I get closer, LOD0, and then as I go further back, it switches out LOD1, LOD2, and actually the quality isn't really being affected and the transitions are pretty good there. And in terms of the triangles, LOD0, that was 168,000. As I go down to LOD1, 84,000, 42,000, LOD3, 21,000. And I can't remember, I have LOD4 as well. No, so LOD3 is the last one. So quite a big saving on the distance. And let's see if that is working in the project by visualizing the LODs. So click save here, close that out. In terms of the performance, it's gone up from 85 to 95. So we've increased the frames per second by 10, around about 10%. And now let's look at the visualization. So if we go into lit, level of detail coloration, mesh LOD, you can see now that all the trees here are blue, including the palm trees. And as I zoom in, the trees are changing LOD. In fact, I just noticed something. I can't see the palm trees there at the moment, so maybe I just have to reset up. Sometimes after you do changes to meshes, you just have to change the mesh in the grass type again to get it to regenerate. So let's just pick a different mesh, then pick the original one again, save it. Okay, now our coconut trees have appeared here. Right, now let's go into the lit level of detail coloration mesh. and we can see that our palm trees are blue. Now our pandanus tree goes to the next level of detail, palm tree there goes to the next level of detail, and now that's level of detail 0. So our level of details are working well for the palm trees as well as all of the other foliage, and we have got a better performance. So let's go back to our lit mode, and as a final tweak in the island, let's just see if we can create a little bit of imperfection in our boardwalk. In your 3D landscapes, you don't want things to be too perfect, and don't be afraid of adding imperfections to your scene. The imperfections can often add to the sense of realism. So if we're looking at our boardwalk here, we created a perfectly parallel array of planks across here, but in reality they might have come loose, they might have been put on at slight angles. So let's just rotate a few of these planks. You could even take a plank or two and rest it at the side just to create a little bit more of a rustic feel. So let's select the boardwalk, and you remember we grouped it before, so just right click here, group, ungroup, or Shift G, so we can select individual elements. And then I'm just going to go through a few of these. Let's start off here. So switch off in the rotation here, switch off the snapping, and then I'm going to select these planks, and just with the rotation tool I'm just going to rotate, switch off the snapping, just do some slight rotations, so literally a few random ones, move it round. And just move your way down here, and don't be afraid to, move a couple of them in the same rotation as well. Again, you don't want to be too organized about this, just want to go through and maybe even shift a few of them down slightly. So let's take this one and maybe move it down so it sticks out slightly, and rotate it slightly as well. So you just end up with something that looks a bit less regular. And let's put this last one further out here. There we go for the end. And you'll just end up with something that just looks a bit less perfect and a bit more in keeping with the spirit of realism in the scene. You can group these back together if you want afterwards. And actually there is one final thing. In the spirit of imperfection, let's do a couple of texture variations just to finish off this last episode. To finish off this episode, I just want to do a couple of changes to the landscape texture just to increase the variation. So the first thing we need to do is open up our landscape material. So if you find the landscape object in your outliner, go down the details till you find the landscape material, our open land theme default, browse to it and double click to open it up. And then we'll just put this on the window in the right hand side here. Let's move it along. Okay. And first thing I want to do is just a quick fix, well, in my eyes anyway, where I did the puddles layer, where we painted that manuals layer. The puddles are a little strong for my liking, so we can change that very easily. If we go down to section 3.6, I believe it is, 3.5, sorry, puddles. We had the puddle size here that we changed, but there's another parameter here, puddle contrast, which you can increase, which will reduce the relative size of the puddle compared to the surrounding areas. So if I double this puddle contrast to 10, you can see that we still have the moist sand, but just a few puddles there. Again, it's up to your taste what you want. So it was 5, somewhere between 5 and 10. I'm going to do maybe 8. So it gives us a little bit more moist sand and fewer puddles in that area. So that's the first thing I want to do. Now I said I wanted to create some variation here. So let's start off with the sand here. If I zoom out slightly, the sand is all single color at the moment. It'd be nice to have darker patches of sand in there. So if you go down to section 3.6 on sand, you've got this sand variation tint intensity at the moment. Let's select that. It's set to 0 at the moment, which means there's no variation in the tint. But if we increase that to 1, you'll see that it introduces this secondary color in various patches in there. Now, you may consider that the right strength, or you might want to reduce that, and you can even change the variation tint as well, color in there. I'm going to reduce it slightly. It's a bit strong for my liking, but not much. 0.8 or 0.7. Yeah. So you can see that we now have sand that varies in color throughout the beach. And in the same vein of variation, and again, this is something you may or may not want to do, but I just want to show you this as an option. Our volcanic rock is all one color at the moment. So we might want to increase the variation in here as well. So my thought process here was I wanted to imagine that these rocks contain some iron, some sort of reddy orangey iron deposits. So I don't want to overdo it, but I want to put some reddy orange variation in here. So in order to do that, similar thing, we need to find the section for slope, which is section 3.3. And if you come down to the same parameter, the slope variation tint intensity, let's start off by making the tint the color we want. We'll probably go overboard here to start off with. So I'm going to drag it over to the right hand side for a sort of a red color. And then I'm going to increase the value, whack the value all the way up to 5. So it's really oversaturated. Click OK. And now let's make our variation tint intensity 1. And what you can see is that we have this, looks like somebody's splashed red paint on the rocks. But that's the sort of effect I want for my iron deposits. I just don't want it so strong. So all I need to do now is either reduce the intensity or reduce the tint here. So let's take that tint and take it down to 1. And you can see, you can just see it there. 2 is probably too much. And 1, you can see, if I click OK here, as I get close up here, you see you just have these slight red streaks in here. And these variations in texture on the sand and the rock and the imperfections are the sort of things that really help to sell the realism of the scene rather than regular textures, which you don't tend to see much in nature. So that's the end of this tropical island creation series. I hope you've found it informative and you've been following along without any issues. Stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe, as I'll be doing more landscape videos in the future, and there'll be a couple of videos coming up soon on adding oceans to any landscape, and also for creating ripples in the water as you run around. So I look forward to seeing you in those videos. See you then.